Hey, Paris. The idea of running business experiments to test hypotheses has gained more and more traction in the business world during the last couple of years, especially for corporates. What is interesting here is what really can happen when you start to run business experiments. Let's talk a bit about that. Why is it getting popular amongst companies to conduct business experiments? What have you observed, Paris?
Hi, Christian. Well, conducting business experiments is a great way to reduce the risk of some of the riskiest assumptions built into the development of new products and services. We know that 7 out of 10 products and services that launch in the market indeed fail. And we also know that the typical market research that gets aggregate results is just not enough evidence to reduce that risk. So business experiments are inspired by startups who have a lot of intention and motivation to make decisions that give them the maximum result. And their motive is to reduce the risk because they only have one chance. The reality, however, is that a corporate startup is not the same as a startup.
So where do you see the main differences between startups doing experiments and corporate startups doing experiments?
Yeah, let's start with a definition. A startup, by definition, is a temporary organization that's designed to search for a repeatable and scalable business model. They don't have any resources, or very few. They don't have any reputation. Nobody knows who they are. And their sense of safety is a bit shaken, right? They don't know if this is going to work. And if it doesn't, what's their plan B? So they're really putting everything out on the table. Because of this, they're always trying to make decisions that are very, very wise. They can't afford mistakes. They work in a very lean way, and they can't afford to lose time. Corporate startups are the exact opposite of what I've just described, for the most part. Let me give you an example. If you wanted to start a new business, Christian, and you found a great name, the domain name is available, and you were to purchase that domain, how long would it take you to purchase that domain?
I would say maximum 5 minutes.
5 minutes, right? Well, for a corporate startup, that's several weeks. If they don't have the approvals in place and they need to go through the approvals and the purchase orders and the signatures, that slows them down. It's a silly example, but you can understand how that manifests systematically across all the decisions they need to make. And startups, by design, are there to make constant decisions and be able to action them immediately. So right off the bat, a corporate startup has a few more challenges.
Mm-hmm. What would you say are the biggest challenges corporate startups have when conducting experiments?
Well, when conducting experiments, first, let's understand that unlike a startup founder who becomes a bit of a one-man band and they can do everything on their own, if they can't, they find out ways to do that. A corporate startup has a different mindset. They have a different dynamic of the team. You need to make sure that there's a multidisciplinary team, whereas one person is great at doing research, another person might be able to hack their way into developing a landing page, yet another person might have the command of the language better than everybody else, and they're responsible for the narrative that goes on their experiments, whether it's a landing page or brochure or anything else. So a corporate startup relies much more on the dynamics of the team that are sometimes de facto compiled for the purpose of innovation. So we need to pay really good attention as to who those people are and what their skills are and how they complement each other.
So it's almost like they have to acquire new skills then in order to be able to conduct experiments. What are the challenges they face when they enter a testing phase?
Absolutely. So in the testing phase, we'll break that down into 2 parts. The first one is choosing the appropriate experiment. And the second one is to actually implement that experiment. Now, I will assume that you will have some professional guidance to be able to choose the appropriate experiment. We don't expect everybody working in a corporate to be an expert in research methods, but then they have to build it. And so when they're going to build it, that's when it starts to get a bit more challenging.
Do you have an example of when a startup was facing difficulties when implementing an experiment, perhaps with a type of experiment which is quite popular these days?
Definitely. I would say the sexiest experiment out there would be the landing page. And imagine now you have a landing page, which is other words for a website, but just a simpler one. You would have a lot of activity, whether through social media or mail out campaigns to drive traffic and hopefully your customer segment traffic to your website. Once they get there, they'll interact with your value proposition, the proposed gain creators and pain relievers. And eventually you hope that they'll take some action. So we use this term called CTA, call to action, which may be to subscribe to a newsletter or find out more or let me know when it's ready or even buy. So all these things are put together. And you can imagine the wealth of data that you can measure from all these different techniques and what you can do with that data afterwards is just absolutely valuable to the team that looks at the data and tries to generate some insights to help them make their decisions moving forward. So in that sense, let me walk you through some of the key steps in building a landing page and some of the typical mistakes that happen. It begins with a domain. If they want to purchase a domain, but they can't afford to go through the time constraints of buying it, and they might purchase something for free, well, that in and of itself signals that this is not a real thing. And so automatically your visitors will be put off by that. The second one is hosting. If you don't choose the appropriate hosting, your website might be sluggish. What we know is that 53% of visitors will abandon your website if it takes more than 3 seconds to load. Now, we're not all experts at building websites, so there's a lot of these kind of little details that they need to be aware of when they're selecting their hosting provider. The third one is the SSL certificate. And that is, I won't go into the complexities and the technicalities of it, but if you don't ensure that your website is secure, when people visit, they'll get a warning that says it's unsafe. Well, guess what? You won't get any visitors. Another one that's very common nowadays, especially in Europe, is GDPR compliance, especially since you're running an experiment where you're hoping to get some data from your customers, for example, their email. If you don't ensure that the legal language and the way you've placed it and the way you're collecting the data and the double opt-ins and all these other things are in place, then you might actually be breaking the law. So that's a big concern. Then we talk about analytics. I spoke about it already before, but if teams forget to include the analytics plugins or tools that need to be kind of bundled with your website, then they're missing out. People will just show up to the website, but you won't know what they did, where they came from, how much time they spent. So all these things are extremely important to set up correctly. Then we'll talk about design and user experience. 94% of first impressions are design related. So in startup world, we always say, if you've launched a pretty product, you've launched too late. It's almost like this ugliness is welcome. Not on your landing page. Your landing page can't afford to look ugly. It needs to look professional and real so it can get you the results that are closer to reality. So the second thing is that if your user experience is wrong, people can't find the call to action, the narrative doesn't seem to make sense, then 55% of those people were going to spend less than 15 seconds. They're not going to give you the time of day to figure it out. It's your job to make sure that the website works. And finally, content. You don't want people to come to this dry page and that screams, this is an experiment. You want some rich content, a video, an explainer video, some good photography that's not stock photography. All these things put together, you can create a beautiful landing page that gets you more real results.
So bringing it all together, what should we do to make sure we get less things go wrong when it comes to business experiments?
Absolutely. My first advice is to make sure you design an ecosystem where there's no barriers to prototype development. And that's not too hard to do. What you do is you give a small budget to a team where you tell them, go spend, you don't need to get permissions from anybody. And you'll see the value of that is insurmountable later down the line when you look at the risk reduction they've made on their new idea. The second one is to make sure you test the same hypothesis from multiple angles, different vantage points. Just because you got great results in this one experiment for that one hypothesis doesn't mean it's what's real out there. Double check, triple check. And the third one is to involve internal stakeholders early. That's the all precious buy-in. What I advise my teams to do is during the discovery part where they focus on external customer interviews, turn your lens internal as well and start to talk to different people in your company. You'll be surprised at the amount of knowledge other people who are not actively involved in your idea may have and how they can help you. Down the line, that buy-in that you've created by planting that seed early is going to give you a lot of dividends.
Paris, thank you so much. Super exciting thoughts. Great to learn about your perspectives from your experience in running business experiments.